Thank you, Kate. Such a beautiful song. One of my favorites. So now I have the wonderful opportunity to introduce you to our guest speaker today, Reverend Dalia Adams. She travels to us further east. I met her last week in Vacaville at the Unity Leadership Conference, and she traveled here this morning, so we are very blessed to have her. And I don't know if you read your email bulletin for this week. Her bio is very impressive and broad, and she will add on to what I am going to say, but Reverend Dalia is now our region's representative to Unity, and that is a big job, a big responsibility, and she comes with a lot of experience bringing her to that job, so that's marvelous. She's also a psychologist. She was a minister at Unity in Vacaville for 10 years, 11 years, and she has retired from that position, but she is not slowing down. She is doing guest speaker events and other ministries, meditation groups, workshops. So she will add on to this impressive resume. Let's all give her a very warm welcome.
Baby, you must have been a beautiful Dalia. That's the closest I can get to Dalia. Okay.
Well, thank you for that, Sue, and thank you for welcoming me and having me here with you this morning. I think Sue covered a lot of what was in that little biography. But part of, and this aligns with the talk that I'm doing today, I'm talking about the power of will, or the way I put it was will, new word, power, as opposed to the scrunched willpower that we struggle with sometimes. My life really has been a strange path. I've done many different things. And as I've been reflecting on my path, the last year and a half that I've been semi-retired, what I realized is that in a very real way, a choice that I made as a child led me to right here. So it was the power of my will. Even though through much of my life and the meanderings that I've gone through, I was frequently confused. I would have thoughts like, what am I doing here? How did I end up here? What does this have to do with me? And it really, really all comes together. So when I was very little, like all through elementary school, I went to a Catholic school, and we were required every day before school to go to Mass, and Mass is the Catholic service. And during the week, it's a condensed version. There's just one priest, no other attendants. The parish that I went to school in and where this Mass was held was an ethnic parish, which means many of the people did not speak English. So when the Catholic Church went from Latin to English, ethnic parishes were not required to. So there I was every single morning of my elementary school days. I'd sit for a half hour, and the priest would chant in Latin. He would say a few prayers in Latin, very short prayers, but mostly it was chanting in Latin and incense. And we were supposed to sit there being silent. So I would sit in the silence, and at some point very early on, I came to love those moments. And looking back, what was happening for me was a very deep meditation. Nowadays, it's Hindu chants, right, and mantras and incense of a different sort. But I would go into this inner place. I didn't have words for all of that back then. But it was a place where I felt safe. It was a space, an inner space that I'd longed to go back to. So I had one heck of a meditation practice when I was growing up. Again, no words for that. But whatever that was, I knew it wasn't the God in the sky that I was being taught in the religion classes, you know, the white beard, the one that acted like Santa Claus, naughty or nice, the one that I had to report all my sins to. I knew it wasn't that, but somehow inside of me, I knew that whatever that was I was experiencing was very much an experience of God. And so the nuns would tell us that God was the most important thing in life. And I would think of those moments, and I decided from the bottom of my heart that what I wanted most in my life, what I was choosing at that young age, probably talking 7 or 8, was to live a life in which I came to know God. And so out of that, at that young age, I decided that what I needed to reach for was to be a contemplative nun. And I from the time I could start writing letters, I started writing them saying, I want to join your convent. It was the Carmelite convent I wrote to. I want to join your convent. What do? They ignored me until I was 11. And when I wrote a letter at age 11, I got a letter back saying, we would love to welcome you into our community if that is really your path. And these are the requirements. One was that I had to wait till I was 13. List of long requirements, and I don't remember. The first one was age 13. The very last one was I needed signed, written permission from each of my parents. I burst into tears. I ripped up the letter, and I gave up on this choice, this dream, this intention. And then I discovered boys, and boys replaced God. Actually, that's like 20 other stories, but so my life progressed. I decided I was a very solitary child. I didn't have brothers or sisters, and I was not. The neighborhood children were not allowed to play with me because my parents were refugees. And back then, just like today, in certain parts of the country, that was a blackballing, condition. So I grew up, and my mother was chronically ill. My father worked a lot. And so I had my dogs, and I had myself. And so when I tried to imagine what I wanted to do with my life, I thought that if I were a research scientist, I could be alone in my lab and be very comfortable in my skin, right? So I did that. I sought for that. I ended up with the most amazing job in Heidelberg, at Heidelberg University, that had everything I could have ever wanted in a job. Again, that's another long, long story. But I discovered I was bored to tears. I stayed for a year to make sure that it wasn't just like a temporary reaction. I left the job, and then I didn't know what I wanted to do. I could not find a job anywhere. I came back to the States in a terrible job market and spent months and months filling out every job application. Back then they were all on paper and you sent them in by mail. And somewhere in there, friends were sending me applications, and one friend sent me an application to be a teacher in the U.S. Virgin Islands. I filled that out. Now, mind you, I didn't know what I wanted to do. I picked this research job out of kind of, logical reasoning, no, not this, and then landed on that. But the one thing I knew for certain in that process was I did not want to teach. I did not want to be a teacher. It was so clear. And so here's this job offer to be a teacher. I had no teacher training, no teacher education. But in the Virgin Islands, to teach secondary school, you had to have a degree in the subject you were teaching. And I was offered a job teaching science, and I had a biology degree, chemistry minor. And I said yes, because I could not find a job. And I moved down to the islands. Absolutely fell in love with teaching. So I had this dream job that I didn't like, and this totally, I never want to do this job that I ended up loving. And I taught in the Virgin Islands for 13 years. I lived there for 14. But what came out of that was the children that I taught were all labeled troubled. They all came from very difficult backgrounds. They were traumatized. And they all transformed. Every single child at the school where I taught went on to college. Every single one. And they were not expected to graduate, let alone go on to college. And I was in awe. I was just so in awe. I wanted to know what allowed children, what allowed people to transform trauma into a meaningful and successful life. I wanted to know that with my whole heart. So from there I went to graduate school in psychology. Never wanted to be a psychologist. I just figured that was my pathway to knowing how you transform trauma. So I did that, loved it, worked for 12 years as a psychologist, 7 years in graduate school. It's almost 20 years of my life. And my life was perfect, absolutely perfect from the outside. I had a great relationship. I had work that I loved. I was being paid good money for the first and only time in my life. And I had great friends. I had found unity during those years. I had a prayer group that met at my house once a week for 10 years. I mean, it was a perfect life. And there was this gaping hole inside of me. And I couldn't get rid of it. And I couldn't even talk to anybody about it because they would look at me like I was crazy, like, how could you possibly feel a painful emptiness when you have great relationships, you have a wonderful son, you have work you love, you live right on the water in Florida, you know, everything is great, but it was for real. So I went to Unity Village for a week-long silent retreat, and I put God on notice. I said, I want to have a purpose or meaning in my life, and you've got 1 week. You have until the end of the retreat to let me know what that is. And it was a declaration. So I've made some choices. I exercised the power of my will as a child. When I went on to learn psychology, when I went to the village, I put God on notice. Okay, this was truly experiences of will, the power of will that is within each of us. I wasn't hesitating. I wasn't double guessing any of that. I didn't even question, back then I wasn't quite experientially knowing my oneness with God. I knew intellectually, but it wasn't because the God that I put on notice was out there at the village, at the retreat, right? So I sit down the first time we gathered in silence, and the still small voice that I heard as a booming loud voice said, your purpose is to know God. Back to my childhood, right? Where I chose that as my purpose. To know God, to love, and to do the next step. So in my deep lacking of wisdom, my answer to God, it wasn't the yes that we sang about, was what kind of stupid purpose is that? I was a psychologist, and I knew that when you set goals, you had to have a beginning, a middle, and an end. You had to be able to recognize when you've achieved the goal. I was confusing goal and purpose. I said to God, how will I know when I've achieved it? Give me something better. The next time I went into silence, that voice came back and it said, Dalia, be a unity minister. And I said no. For 7 years I said no until I finally said yes. But each of those are examples of how the power of my will was operating. That which I declared as a child was coming to be, even though I had achieved outwardly a life that many people would dream of. That original intention was still waiting for greater fulfillment. So my life circumstantially led me to fulfill the things that I had declared and chosen, and is still doing that. It took being in California and working as a minister, and before that, Silent Unity, for me to have that aha moment, like, because I had felt for a while like this whole ministry thing was being imposed on me against my will, right? Against my superficial, what I think I want. But my deepest heart's desire was actually coming into being. So that's my story, and I embedded it in my talk. I've done lots of things, but it's really, each step of the way was a response from the universe for that which I decreed, that which I chose, that which was my deepest desire, because our will, the power of our will, is different from willpower, right? Willpower, it's kind of like we choose something, and then if we're going to lose weight, then we're only going to eat this type of food, and this and that, some sort of diet. And the story that we all hear is how you fall off the diet, or maybe we've experienced it, and then we shame ourselves and we feel miserable and we start again. And there's endless research that shows people who diet gain the weight and back, So this is willpower with a small, and it's not a bad thing. I mean, it's good. It's our attempt to achieve something that we want. But when we declare something, when we choose something from our deepest heart desire, I believe that the universe has no choice but to bring it into being. Now, I don't even want to admit how many years ago I declared that as a child. So sometimes it takes a while, I've asked myself in these last few years, would I have focused my life on knowing God the way I do now, had I not had that journey with its winding path? The answer is probably no. So the universe knew a way of bringing that into being that I would have never dreamed of. Had I made it conditional, I may have tripped myself up. But it was an open-ended declaration of my deepest heart desire at that time. Charles Fillmore said, I have it written down because I don't want to mess it up. Where did I write it down? Here it is. He said that the power of the will, when he wrote about the 12 powers, it's the avenue through which the I am expresses. And the I am is that inner presence, that divine inner presence, the I am that I am. And in unity, we're taught to live from that I am, from that experience of our own divinity, from that knowing that we are one with the divine. So the avenue through which the I am expresses is what we mean by the power of will. Years back, many, many years back, when I was about 19, I dated a young man who was a smoker. And it was back before it was widely known how bad it was for you. And without intending to, I ended up smoking too, because I was always in his smoke, and I ended up getting addicted before I ever started. But so I smoked, and I smoked for a long time, maybe 20 years. And I kept trying to quit. I kept deciding I'm quitting, I've had enough. And I would quit. It would be a long and painful process, or a cold turkey painful process. And within a couple months, maybe 3 months at best, I'd be back to smoking. And my son, who begged me to stop pretty much most of his life, was in college now, and he was still. And I was so ashamed. I mean, I was so ashamed that I couldn't quit, but there it was. And I decided one year that by my birthday was in August, by my birthday I would quit. And I tapered. I decreased the number of cigarettes, and I had been at about a carton and a half, a week, I guess. Gosh, that's a lot. And I got it down to, I would only buy 2 packs at a time. 1 pack would stay in the car, and the other could travel with me. And it kept me very aware of how much I was smoking. So I was succeeding, and over a couple, 2.5 months or so, I got it down to maybe 4 or 5 cigarettes a day, which was big. And so one day I finished the 1 pack that I carried into the house with me, and I went back to the car to get the 2nd pack, and I couldn't find it. And I ended up cleaning the car, the garage, the house, the way an addict would, right? I was going to find that pack no matter what. And it was nowhere to be found. And I got so angry. Not the kind of adrenaline knee-jerk anger, but deep inside, I was so angry, and I decided no more. I refused to be under the power of this stuff. And it was such a deep no more. I am free of these cigarettes forevermore. And I never smoked again. Ever. There were very few temptations. I was done. After many years of willpower, the power of my will came into being. So I invite everybody to acknowledge that power, to go into that I am, and allow your deepest heart's desires to be expressed through that I am. And through that, you come to know the power of will. And so now let us take that into our time of meditation. I invite you to sit comfortably. Allow your breath to come easily and effortlessly. And for a little while, simply notice the movement of your breath. Notice how your breath feels when you breathe in and when you breathe out. And you may even notice how each breath takes you a little deeper, deeper into that inner space, that sacred space where you meet the presence that is God. The I am. And I invite you to bring into that sacred space. I invite you to bring before the presence that is your true nature a desire that comes deep from within your own heart. And place it in the hands of God, if you will. Place it into that consciousness of divine presence. Along with the willingness to allow that divine power to bring into being that which is yours, to bring into being in God's way, through the wisdom of the universe, that which you declare, that which you choose, that which you allow. And I invite you now to take that into the silence. And so now in this moment, we claim the power of the will. We know that our will aligns with our deepest desires, aligns with the will that we call the will of God. For our will allows us to choose. and to bring into being our greatest good. And for all of this, now we are grateful. So deeply grateful. And I invite you to join me as we say together, thank you, thank you, thank you, God. And so it is. And so now I invite you to gently and easily bring your attention back into this room, back into this time and place. To allow yourself to feel the awe and the joy and the truth that we are powerful, powerful beings. And we claim our power to choose and the power of our will. And we are grateful.